Ah, yes. As you can tell by the stack of papers here, let's see here. Testing 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2. You know what? Perfect. All right. I just wanted to make sure the mic was working. First show, had to work through some technical difficulties at the start, but hey, we are here. And as you can tell by the stack of papers that I got here, it's a pretty thick stack because who says that we can't talk some college football in July? Because I'm certainly not one of those people. Now, if you were like myself and you tuned into the U.S. soccer game yesterday, first of all, it was rough. It was like watching a slow, painful death, and it was really unfortunate. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of us, myself included, who really got into the U.S. men's soccer team, now that they are officially knocked out of the FIFA World Cup, in our minds, we have moved on. Now, there's still baseball, MLB, the season's going on right now, but a lot of us have turned our attention to college football. And that is why I started this show. So for those of you that are new, and I'm assuming most of you are, welcome into the air raid with Parker Kelley. It's really simple. We talk college football year-round because I'm a former collegiate quarterback. College football is my passion, and I just want to talk college football. That's what I want to do. And like I said at the beginning, a lot of us in our minds have moved on to the start of football season as we are about a month away from games being played. Last time I checked, it was July 7th. So that means in August, which is next month, we will have games being played. At the start of August, we will have training camps that opened up and all of that good stuff. So why not go ahead and get a head start now? Okay, so some real quick, I don't know if ground rules is just kind of of how this show is going to work. So this is a college football year-round show. Now, as the season kind of goes on, once we get to, I'd say about February or so, well after the national championship has been played, and believe it or not, this year I believe it's being played on January 25th, which is incredibly late. Once we get about to that February point, we may dive into a little college basketball because that is also another one of my passions. But for the most part, we really stick to college football. And I do want to get out ahead of something because, as you can tell, we are not in an official studio. This is my little in-home studio. I'm doing this show in partnership with my employer, 1025 The Game. Now, if you're watching, you can watch on our YouTube channel. You can watch on my YouTube channel. There are several different ways to watch. You can also watch on Twitter or X, whichever one that you call it. We are in the process of getting a podcasting studio at 1025, which I am really excited about because then that means that I will not have to do the show from my in-home studio, but rather a more professional looking studio. But since we are starting this thing from scratch, we kind of have to work with what we have. And that's okay because we're just going to sit back, those of you that are listening, kick your feet up, and let's just talk some college football. That's why we're all here, right? Okay, so, and also too, really important thing. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel at Parker_Kelley10. And also you can subscribe to 1025 The Game, a couple different YouTube channels. Again, it doesn't sign you up for anything. It doesn't sign you up for an email list or anything like that. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free. It just really helps us out at 1025 The Game, helps me out as well so that we can keep this show free and we don't have to put it behind any type of paywall. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so media days are upon us, college football media days. And we start with the Big 12 this week. They actually kick things off today from Frisco, Texas, from the Star, where the Dallas Cowboys are. And they will have their Big 12 media days today and tomorrow. So kind of how I wanted to set this up, at least for the month of July. Next week, ACC Media Days. The week after that, I'll actually be out of town that week, but I will still be talking about SEC Media Days, which I believe start on the 20th, if I'm not mistaken. And then the week after that, we get into the Big Ten. They kind of wrap things up for the Power Four conferences. So we're going to start with the Big 12. Will be a really Big 12 heavy show today, but that's okay because we love the Big 12 around here. So as I said, Big 12 Media Days kicked off today. From Frisco, Texas, from the Star, Commissioner Brett Yormark had a couple of interesting things to say, right? He announced the deal with Monster Energy, which I will actually get to at the tail end of the show, so make sure you're listening all the way for that. But as you might imagine, it's been very quiet this offseason in the Big 12. And of course, if you're listening to my voice, I'm saying that very sarcastically because we just had a whole saga involving Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby. And lots of people in the college football media, if you know anything about the college football media space in general, when there's a big hot button issue like that, that is going to be the primary focus, even if it is in the past. Even if things as of right now seem settled, there's probably still more details to come regarding that. That is going to be a main topic of conversation, especially at the conference media days. So Commissioner Brett Yormark was asked about Texas Tech. He was asked if he ever supported Texas Tech's fight to get Brendan Sorsby eligible. And I have it written down. I have the exact quote that I saw from Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports, who, by the way, does a great job covering all of this stuff. Here's what Brett Yormark had to say, quote, "Today is not the time to address that issue. Today is about celebrating the upcoming season in our 16 schools," end quote. So that is a typical commissioner speak. You probably could have guessed that Brett Yormark was going to say that. Now, I believe the Big 12, I believe the rest of the Big 12 institutions outside of Texas Tech and Brett Yormark handled that situation pretty close to how I would have handled it. They didn't support it. They threatened to sue Texas Tech. They threatened to remove them from being eligible for the Big 12 Conference Championship game, which would have been another whole ordeal in itself. But here's my issue with that. I like Brett Yormark. I have respect for how he handled that situation. But I also respect another thing, and that's authenticity, and I respect honesty. Look, I may not always like your answers, but at least if you're honest with me, I will understand. At least if there's some logic-based reasoning behind it, I will understand. So I believe that the media, for one, the fans, the people that actually watch the sport, I believe they deserve to know an answer. So personally, I wish Brett Yormark would have talked about it. I believe that he should. And also, I believe that he should have been aware, and maybe he was. He should have been aware that this was going to be probably the number one thing brought up at Big 12 Media Days down in Texas. What else did he think was going to get talked about? That's what I'm wondering. Brendan Sorsby was going to get talked about, whether it was first, whether it was second, it was going to get brought up. So I do wish that Brett Yormark would have talked about it, but let's talk about Texas Tech for a second. And I'm speaking to you, those that are listening live. What is your view of Texas Tech, the football team, maybe the whole athletic department? Big scope here. What is your view of Texas Tech post the Brendan Sorsby saga, for lack of a better term? Because I'll tell you what I think. See, I'm a big fan of Joey McGuire. I've listened to several interviews with Joey McGuire. I haven't had the pleasure of speaking with Joey directly, although I'm sure that opportunity might come down the road. And I'm certainly very excited about the opportunity if that ever comes. But I'm a fan of Joey McGuire. I've listened to him talk about his journey from, being a high school coach at some of the major classifications in Texas high school football, which is a big deal in itself, to, his road to getting to where he is now at Texas Tech, kind of climbing up the coaching ladder and eventually landing the head coaching job at Texas Tech, seeing what they were able to do this last year. Look, it's no surprise that Texas Tech has a lot of money, right? They have a oil billionaire booster by the name of Cody Campbell. They've made it very plainly known that they bought a majority of their team last year, and they were one of the top spenders in college football. The thing about that in this era is, and I always go back to what Nick Saban said. He said this on College Game Day. If you spend money on the wrong players, you're SOL. And I'll let you kind of fill in the blank on what that might mean. Texas Tech went and they spent a lot of money to bring in that roster. So they do that, and it's tough because you look at it from an outside perspective, and you're kind of playing transfer portal roulette in a way. We saw this with Florida State. Remember the year that they went undefeated in the final year of the 14 college football playoff? They famously got left out and went to the Orange Bowl versus Georgia. That year, a majority of their players came from the transfer portal. Well, fast forward to a year later, and they drop off significantly and win 2 games in the regular season, go 2-10, and miss a bowl game. Well, they tried doing the exact same thing, getting majority of their players from the transfer portal, and we see that it bit them in the butt. So you just have to be careful in this day and age of college football of playing portal roulette. Well, Texas Tech, they went out and they got a bunch of these players from the portal, and yet Joey McGuire famously on the record has said that it was the best culture in the locker room that he's ever had while he's been a head coach of football at any level. And I really do think that speaks to the type of man that Joey McGuire is, the type of culture setter that you have to be a head coach at the Power 4 level, even if it is the Big 12 and not the SEC and the Big 10. So I like Joey McGuire. I think he's a good man. I think he has good morals. But when it came to this Brendan Sorsby situation, and it's all out there, it's all been reported that he bet on his own team when he was a member of the Indiana football team in 2022, placing over 40 bets on the Hoosiers. I don't care if he was on the field. I don't care if he wasn't the starting quarterback. That is the gold standard rule in college athletics. You can't bet on your own team, and yet Brendan Sorsby did it anyway. Now, I don't know Brendan Sorsby, so I'm not here to make judgments on his character. I may feel a certain way about the whole betting allegations, and, well, they're not just allegations at this point, they're facts, what's been reported. But you don't have to play a guy like that. And Joey McGuire, I understand wanting to help the kid out in any way that you can. So there's an example of this. So Texas Tech had a player by the name of Dakota Allen. Now, this was a few years ago. If any of you have seen Last Chance U, I believe he was featured on that East Mississippi Community College team. If you haven't checked out Last Chance U, I highly recommend you go do that. But Dakota Allen is a defensive end. He's featured in the show. He ends up committing to Texas Tech. Long story short, he got into some trouble with the law. Texas Tech kicked him off the football team, but yet they still supported him as a human being, as a person, as a former player and all that stuff, but they didn't play him. So you fast forward to now, and Texas Tech was pulling every string. They were trying to pull every lever so that they could get Brendan Sorsby to play. And here I am, and I kept asking myself the same thing. If I'm Joey McGuire, or if I think Joey McGuire, and I think very highly of him, I think he's again, like I said, a great man. Does this not cross some sort of moral boundary for you? That's what I would think. That's immediately where my mind went. So I was really thrown off by all of that. And then you go to athletic director Kirby Hoka and that whole PR stunt that they tried to pull on all of us. You remember they released that, I don't know, it might have been a over 20-minute long video on why they're fighting for Sorsby, why they believe he should be eligible to play. It was just a PR stunt, and it was a terrible PR stunt. We all know that. They were trying to treat us like we were some, elementary students. We didn't know better. Listen, if you're a college football fan and you have a fully functioning brain, which I'm sure all of you do, you can see right through that. And it was terrible. Now to Cody Campbell. There are a lot of thoughts about Cody Campbell. And listen, I like Cody Campbell. I know that he's been a huge advocate for the Protecting College Sports Act, which has also been a really hot button issue over the course of the while games haven't been played. I don't believe in the word off season because there's really no more off season in college football. It's a year-round thing. He's been in full support of that, but he's also been in full support of trying to get Sorsby to play. So it's kind of like, well, I agree with you on this. I don't agree with you on that. There are a lot of thoughts going around about Cody Campbell. So that leads me to my next thing. Now that we've gotten that out of the way about what are our thoughts on Texas Tech post the Brendan Sorsby saga, let's go to the Big 12 and look at it as a whole here. Is it still Texas Tech in the field? Because here's why Texas Tech went so hard after Brendan Sorsby. If you remember that game, the college football playoff versus Oregon in the Orange Bowl down in Miami, Texas Tech, they won the Big 12. They earned a first-round bye. They get Oregon, and they get shut out. They put 0 points on the scoreboard. Now, I had a coach in high school and college that used to say something to me, and it's always stuck with me, that stats never lie, but they also don't tell the truth either. So if you're looking at the box score and you see that Texas Tech put up 0 points, that looks like they just got stomped. And in a way, sure, the defense actually played pretty well in that game if you go back and watch, but they couldn't get anything going on offense, and that really boiled down to one position, and that was quarterback. And not to slight Baron Morton or anything, I think he did fine there, but he just wasn't the type of quarterback, the caliber of quarterback that Texas Tech needed to get over the hump and get to national championship status. So they went hard after Brendan Sorsby in the portal. He was the number one quarterback in the portal, and they land him. They didn't know about all the betting stuff until after the fact, so it's just kind of a tough situation. But luckily, they had their backup quarterback, who was also their backup last year, in Will Hammond. Now, Will Hammond came in relief of Brendan Sorsby a couple times and actually played pretty well. Like I think he's a very talented player, and he has a lot of skill, certainly. So now he's left to be their starting quarterback. He's coming off an ACL injury. Reports are that he will be ready by week 1. And even if he's not ready by week 1, he still has a little bit of leeway, because if you're looking at Texas Tech's schedule, and I'm looking at it here, they start with Abilene Christian, and then they're at Oregon State, their first 2 games before they start Big 12 play. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Texas Tech is going to be fine regardless of who's starting the quarterback, at least for those first 2 games. But things start to get a little tougher in week 3 as they play Houston, and I will talk about that a little bit later as well in the show. So I go back to my original question. Is it still Texas Tech in the field in the Big 12? Yes, I do think it is. And I have some stats for you. They returned 65% of last year's team. They are tied for the most in the Big 12 in returning talent with Houston, who is also number 1. Their 2026 high school recruiting class, first in the Big 12, 19th nationally. This is all going to be according to On3. The 2026 transfer portal class, second nationally behind Indiana. And then you look at this 2027 recruiting class, this high school recruiting class that they have coming in for the next year. As of right now, it's first in the Big 12 and it's ninth nationally. So I'm still one of the people that believe the lifeblood of roster construction in college football is always going to be through high school recruiting. You supplement with players from the transfer portal. It's the same thing if you go to the NFL, right? The lifeblood of roster construction in the professional ranks is through the draft, and then you're supposed to supplement with free agents. So I believe that is still the same thing in college football. It's the exact same thing analogy, and I don't always compare college football to the NFL because I believe they're sometimes similar, and our leaders in college football are trying to make it closer to the NFL every single day, but I still believe it's very different from the NFL, the Sunday game. So you take what Texas Tech has coming back, you take that and you pair it with a really good high school recruiting class, top 20 nationally. You bake in a top 2 transfer portal class, and you look at their schedule. Here, let me go ahead and read off their schedule to you for those that are listening. Abilene Christian week 1, at Oregon State in week 2, Houston in week 3, Sam Houston at Colorado, Arizona State, at Cincinnati, at home versus Arizona and West Virginia, at Oklahoma State, at Baylor, TCU. Not exactly a murderer's row of a schedule. So I am of firm belief that regardless if they have Sorsby or not, which they're not going to have Sorsby for this season, Texas Tech could probably go undefeated, might go 11-1, maybe go 10-2. I tend to lean 11-1. I could see a loss in there. I still think it's Texas Tech in the field. Bill Connolly, who does a great job writing articles for ESPN about college football, he gave Texas Tech a 62.9% chance, we'll just say 63, a 63% chance to win 11 plus games this season. Now, I don't know how he came to get that number, but I'm just going off of what Bill Connolly said, and he's a very reputable source. So the next closest team who has the best chance of winning 11 plus games is BYU. That's not a shocker either. BYU has a 9.7% chance to win 11 games. So there is a significant drop-off, at least if you're looking at the preseason odds. Now let's actually go to BYU because BYU is kind of a fascinating case study this year. So we mentioned that Texas Tech and Houston both returned 65% of last year's team. BYU returned 64% of last year's team. So they're third because Houston and Texas Tech tied for first. They returned their starting quarterback, who was a true freshman last year in Barrett Bachmeier. They returned their leading running back, LJ Martin, and they somehow kept their head coach, Kalani Sitake, from going to Penn State, and they extended him. So Penn State, one of the blue bloods in college football, if they want a coach from the Big 12, usually it feels like they're going to get him. We saw that with Matt Campbell leaving Iowa State and going to Penn State, right? So the fact that BYU was able to keep Kalani Sitake in Provo is a huge deal. So they're basically returning last year's team, right? And BYU is one of those teams where the old-fashioned way of doing things, meaning running the football very well, playing good defense, has worked for them because they had 11 wins last year, and both of their losses were to the same team in Texas Tech. A lot of people, I was not necessarily in that crowd, a lot of people believed that BYU should have been in the playoff. Again, I'm not one of those people, but there are people out there who believe that. So BYU, clearly the second best team, at least in the preseason, to Texas Tech. And that is tier 1. That is tier 1 in the Big 12. Let's talk about another team that's pretty interesting. How about the Utah Utes? No Kyle Whittingham, right? We thought he was going to retire with Utah. Personally, I saw Kyle Whittingham being a Utah Ute for life, retiring. And then at the 11th hour, he goes to Michigan. He brings his offensive coordinator with him in Jason Beck. Morgan Scalley, who there was a little bit of an understanding that Morgan Scalley, who was their defensive coordinator last year, was eventually going to take over as the head coach once Kyle Whittingham either retired or I don't think anybody really expected him to go to Michigan just because, I mean, it was hard to know that Sharon Moore stuff was coming. But, yeah, so Kyle Whittingham is at Michigan, Morgan Scalley in. Here's a question I have about Utah in 2026. Utah's always been a really good defensive team, right? Their defensive coordinator is obviously thought of very highly if he's being promoted to head coach. Does the defense stay the same now that your defensive play caller is handling head coaching duties? And we know head coaching duties in college football involve a lot more than they used to, right? Now that NIL is part of the picture, now that transfer portal is part of the picture, fundraising, that is very important because schools need money with the amount of costs that keep rising, and I'll get to that a little bit later in the show as well. Your head coach needs to be a good fundraiser. So is Morgan Scalley able to balance the defense on top of head coaching duties? We'll have to find out. They do return 55% of last year's team, so well over half. Devin Dampier, he's back at quarterback. That was the first person that when Kyle Whittingham left to go to Michigan, brought the offensive coordinator with him. I've been told that Devin Dampier, their quarterback, was the first person they contacted about staying put in Utah. He stays. Their running back, Wayshawn Parker, who had over 900 rushing yards last year, is also back. Here's the problem, at least as it stands for the offense. So we just addressed a defensive problem, right? Here's the problem on offense. The two guys that I just listed, Devin Dampier and Wayshawn Parker, they're the only two returners on the offense to have at least 5 games of starting experience. That might be a problem. That might be a slight problem with Utah. I'm willing to blindly trust the offensive line for now in Utah. I mean, we did see both of their tackles, Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu, be drafted in the first round of this last NFL draft. So, and Utah's really had good offensive lines for a while. So I am willing to trust that aspect of this. But what about the rest of the offense? What about the weapons for Utah? Since Jason Beck is gone as their offensive coordinator, Scalley has brought in Kevin McGivern. He was the offensive coordinator at Utah State last year. He runs kind of a dual threat offense that is fit for a guy like Devin Dampier, who one of the best aspects of his game is the ability to run the football as quarterback. They brought Utah State's leading receiver, 6'3" Braden Pagan, who had 900 receiving yards last year and 5 touchdowns. They went 11-2 last year if you're including the bowl victory versus Nebraska. This is a tough situation for Morgan Scalley. It really is. The schedule's a little bit tougher than it was last year, and it's hard for me to imagine Utah getting to that 11-win mark or maybe even 10 wins, just double-digit wins in general. It's hard for me to see that, but we do know one thing about the Big 12 is it seems like since Oklahoma was in the Big 12, they've had a different winner of their conference every single year, and it's just been chaos. Things seem to be changing with the way Texas Tech has been trending, but I did want to bring up Utah. And here's my dark horse for the Big 12. That's the Houston Cougars. You remember who their head coach is? Willie Fritz. Willie Fritz came over from Tulane. He had some really good Tulane teams before John Sumrall took over. This is the 3rd year for Willie Fritz at Houston. Went 10-3 last season, went 4-8 the year before that. So we're talking about a 6-win improvement over the span of 2 seasons. Now, I tend to believe that Fritz is one of the most underrated coaches in America. If you want to know what I'm talking about, go look at his track record. He went to 2 straight national championship games with Sam Houston State back when they were in the FCS. He was at Georgia Southern before that. He was at Tulane. He kind of put Tulane on the map. So here's another stat that I found. Willie Fritz, an all-time win percentage of .507. That rises to .730 in year 2, and it holds steady at .725 in year 3. So the year 3 Will Fritz rule is in effect. I would not be surprised to see Houston go 10 wins again this season. They are my dark horse. They returned their quarterback, and this name may sound familiar, Connor Wegman. That name should sound familiar. He was at Texas A&M as a freshman. He was a former 5-star coming out of high school. He's a dual threat guy. had over 2,700 passing yards last year, 795 yards on the ground, 36 total touchdowns. So getting him back is a huge win for the Cougars. They get their leading slot receiver back. They have another big play guy who's going to be a sophomore this year in Corby Young. They still have 3 all-conference linemen that they got from the transfer portal. And here's the thing that's not getting talked about enough with Houston. They had the 7th ranked transfer portal class nationally, and they're also recruiting at the high school level very well. So I had a conversation, it feels like a month ago, with Houston's athletic director, Eddie Nunez, and here's one thing that I took away, and you can take this to the bank. Houston is really leaning in to NIL, and I think that will start to show some dividends this year, and I feel like they kind of got put on the map last year. Still, maybe not. They weren't talked about quite as much. Houston, I expect to be a team that we are talking about this season. Now, I did want to talk about a couple other teams in the Big 12 that returned quarterbacks. Kansas State, they returned Avery Johnson. That is going to be an interesting pairing because they also have a new head coach, Colin Klein, who played quarterback at Kansas State over a decade ago, was in the Heisman Trophy conversation when he was I believe a senior at Kansas State. He was the offensive coordinator at Kansas State 2 years ago, and then he went over to College Station, was the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. When Chris Kleiman retired, who was the previous head coach at Kansas State, they made the call to Colin Klein. Now he's the head coach. Will he be able to get the most out of Avery Johnson? Avery Johnson is a dual threat guy. Here are his numbers from last year. 18-6 touchdown to interception ratio, completed just under 60% of his passes, threw for over 2,300 yards, ran for 477 and 8 touchdowns. So dual threat guy, you would like to see those numbers in the passing game improve. So I think that's where the most improvement has to come from Avery Johnson this season. How about Arizona? Brent Brennan is their head coach. They returned their quarterback in Noah Fafita, who for some reason, when I watch Fafita play, it reminds me of almost like Kyler Murray light because they're both smaller in stature, really strong arm. Murray's definitely more agile than Fafita is. Fafita's pretty agile as well, but he's a really fun player to watch. I don't think Arizona will make as much noise in the Big 12 this year. They went 9-4, but I just don't see that happening again in year 3. Arizona State. It seems like we've stopped talking about Arizona State. You remember just 2 years ago, they had a first-round bye in the college football playoff. They were a 4th down away from beating Texas and advancing to the semifinals to take on Ohio State. What happened? Why aren't we still talking about Arizona State? They went 8-5 last year. Their starting quarterback, Sam Leavitt, is now with Lane Kiffin at LSU. That injury last year really plagued Arizona State. They went 8-5. Now 2026 is on the horizon, and there's a 4-way quarterback battle, but there are really 2 names that you need to know in that. Mikey Keene, who's a 6-year senior. He's at Fresno State. He was at Michigan last year. And Cutter Boley, who is a transfer from Kentucky. I expect Cutter Boley to win this job. He was very good as a freshman at Kentucky, I thought. I watched him play, and I thought he was pretty good. So that'll be interesting to see what he can do in a Kenny Dillingham offense. I haven't sold my stock on Kenny Dillingham. I think he really knows how to coach. What he's trying to do right now is get boosters to invest more into the Arizona State football program. We see that the way Texas Tech has been spending over the last couple of seasons has really sped things up for the rest of the conference. And that's why, we've seen Kenny Dillingham publicly mention in press conferences before and after practice of, hey, we need more support with NIL. So that's something that he's been talking about. How about Baylor? Year 6 for Dave Aranda. Since Baylor went 12-2, this would have been 2020, I believe, maybe even 2021. They went 12-2 that year. They won the Big 12. They went to the Sugar Bowl versus Georgia. Since that point, Baylor has had 3 losing seasons in the last 4 years. Does anybody know who their starting quarterback this year? DJ Lagway. They got DJ Lagway out of the portal from Florida, who, a lot of people thought the world of DJ Lagway. And I still think the intangibles are there. Didn't quite work at Florida last year, really struggled with turnovers, with throwing interceptions. He's hitting the reset button. He's going to replace Sawyer Robinson. Does it work out at Baylor? We'll have to see. And one more team that I wanted to talk about in the Big 12 that I think is really, really interesting. That's Oklahoma State. Now, it's obviously been tough sailing for Oklahoma State over the last couple of seasons. They have a combined 4-20 record over the last 2 years. They're 0-18 in conference play the last 2 years combined. Out goes Mike Gundy. In comes Eric Morris from North Texas, who this is going to hit home with a lot of people, considering that we talk about the Tennessee Titans a lot at 102.5 The Game. Eric Morris coached Cam Ward at Incarnate Word his first couple of years in college. So Eric Morris, he's also worked with Patrick Mahomes last year at North Texas. Drew Mestamaker, great story, had the number one offense in all of college football. So expect Oklahoma State to have a really good offense, because all Oklahoma State did was take North Texas roster, import it in Stillwater, which, by the way, one of the best college names in the country. Stillwater, Oklahoma? That's awesome. Anyways, they imported North Texas's roster in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So Oklahoma State is a team that I'd watch. Don't let the numbers lie to you. They've been awful the last 2 years. I acknowledge that 100%. But I do think Oklahoma State could make a little bit of noise in the Big 12 this year. They brought over 1,400-yard running back Caleb Hawkins. He came over from North Texas. 2 of North Texas's leading receivers, 2 all-conference linemen. They have 87 new players this year. So they're doing a completely different way of doing things at Oklahoma State. Again, I expect it to be fireworks on offense, but kind of the main issue with Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State, it's not that Mike Gundy wasn't a great head coach, because he clearly had a lot of success when he was the head coach of the Cowboys. Adjusting to the modern age of college football. I get it. Coaches may not always like it, but it's certainly something that needs to be done, or else you won't survive. It's just a different world nowadays. So Mike Gundy out, Eric Morris in. Eric Morris is a younger guy. This age of college football, NIL transfer portal, the only age that he really knows. So I see this being a really good fit at Oklahoma State. We have a brisk pace here on the show. By the way, everybody that's listening live, I really appreciate it. Again, we are starting this show from scratch. It's been a dream of mine for a while, or I should say a goal of mine for a while to have a college football show with the way that digital media is trending. I wanted to have a way that we could just sit back, talk college football here on YouTube, and that's what we're doing right now. So I really appreciate everybody that's listening live. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel at Parker_Kelley10. Also subscribe to 102.5 The Game on YouTube as well for more content like this. And trust me, there will be more to come. Top 5 games in the Big 12 for 2026, at least according to me. Now, I will say, full disclosure, this is a list that just includes Big 12 versus Big 12. If I wanted to take the easy way out, I would include games like Arkansas at Utah in week 2, which, by the way, that is going to be an awesome setting, an awesome neutral site game. How about Notre Dame at BYU later on in the season? I believe that's either played mid to late October, early November. I can't remember exactly. My dates are kind of getting a little fuzzy there. But I just decided to go Big 12 versus Big 12. So when you see this list, when you hear this list, I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, let's start with number 1. And by the way, these are also in order of the weeks in which they'll be played. So let's start with number 1 on the list. Houston at Texas Tech. This is a Friday night game because college football games are now played on Fridays as well. Houston at Texas Tech, Friday, September 18th. This is a 7 p.m. Central Time kickoff. Again, you heard me just say that I think it's still Texas Tech in the field in the Big 12, but I expect Houston to get close to the 10-win mark again this year. So this could be one of the games of the year in the conference. Again, this is going to be in Lubbock, two teams from the state of Texas, two teams that certainly can play in the Big 12 championship game come December. This may be a preview of the Big 12 championship for all I know, but that is certainly one that I'm looking forward to. Again, that is week 3, September 18th. That's Texas Tech's first real challenge with Will Hammond as their starting quarterback. Let's move on to the second game, and that is Houston at Kansas State, Saturday, October 10th. So here are a couple notes for this game. Houston, by this point in time, will have played their 6th straight game, and note they have already played Texas Tech, so might be a little beat up heading into this game. They're going on the road, and for Kansas State, I've talked a little bit about Kansas State. I don't really know what to expect. They could be fairly decent. They could be bad. I don't know. But Kansas State, what I do know is the way their schedule is set up, they're coming off of a bye week. So they will be rested, and they will be hosting a team that has played 6 straight games, played one of the best teams in the country in Texas Tech, and they haven't had their bye week yet. So, again, that is Houston at Kansas State, Saturday, October 10th. You know I had to throw this game in there. I really had to throw this game in there for obvious reasons, right? Texas Tech at Cincinnati. That is Saturday, October 24th. Again, Brendan Sorsby transferring from Cincinnati to Texas Tech. Now, he won't be playing in the game, but I feel like there are going to be lingering effects of that whole saga present in this game, even if Brendan Sorsby's not playing, because there is a lawsuit still out there somewhere in the ether. Brendan Sorsby, Cincinnati's trying to get $1 million from him. And obviously everything that happened at Texas Tech, I had to put this game on there. And by the way, too, it's at Cincinnati, the place that Brendan Sorsby came from. So I'm really looking forward to that game. Let's move on down the list. By the way, during that game, Cincinnati will be coming off of a road game at West Virginia. And I did promise one of my buddies that I would mention West Virginia on the show. It is the summer. We do know that. I believe I'm looking at the calendar right now. It says July 7th. So we are in the dog days of summer. So how I spent some of my time in the sports world watching things, the College World Series. College baseball is pretty big, down here in the South. West Virginia made a magical run. I remember I posted something on Twitter about a month ago because West Virginia started a trend, right? Singing country roads at the end of wins during baseball season. And that's, caught on like other teams have been doing it. I know the U.S. men's national team has been doing that as well. So I posted something on Twitter and, it's something simple. Man, I love this. Morgantown is electric right now. And West Virginia people started flooding my DMs. They started following me on Twitter. I probably got feels like 100 of you guys in Morgantown following me on Twitter. And let me just say this. I don't really know what to expect from Rich Rodriguez in year 2 in West Virginia football, but here's what I do know and here's what I will say. I love you guys. I love the fan base, and who knows? Maybe we'll get to talk to Rich Rodriguez at some point. I'll leave it at that. Moving on with the list. Let's get to Saturday, October 24th. So this is the same day as Texas Tech and Cincinnati. We have Houston at Utah. Obviously very high on Houston. Utah is coming off of an 11-win season. Again, not really sure entirely what to expect. Whoever made whoever made Houston's schedule this year, I don't know what you were doing, because when Houston gets around to playing this game in late October on the road in Utah, Salt Lake City late in the fall, conditions will not be ideal. Let's just put it that way. So Houston will be coming off their 8th straight game. They don't get a bye week until after this game is played. Again, the conditions in Utah in late October. For Utah, they will be coming off of a road game at Colorado the week before, but they get to turn around and play at home. So that'll be an interesting game to watch. Maybe a we're looking at 2 contenders for the Big 12 when it's all said and done. And the last one, this is probably my favorite game on this list. And I saved the best for last. BYU at Utah. The Holy War, referred to by no other name on this show. Don't let any corporate types tell you otherwise. This will always be the Holy War. They can't change the name. It'll always be the Holy War. I never know when this game is going to be played because it's constantly shifting around. BYU was an independent team for a while. They weren't in a conference. Utah was formerly in the Pac-12, RIP. They are trying to bring the Pac-12 back, but it's not the same. And then Utah makes the move to the Big 12. BYU also in the Big 12. They kind of move around this game every year, so I'm not always sure when it's going to be played. But we do know that it's going to be played Saturday, November 7th, the Holy War. Utah will be coming off of a road game at Cincinnati on Halloween. That should be fun. For BYU, it'll be their 6th straight game. Early bye week for the Cougars. It comes after their week 3 game. So by this point in time, we get to the Holy War. BYU would have already hosted Notre Dame, and they would have played Arizona State as well in the 2, or no, it would have been the 3 weeks leading up to the Holy War. So pretty tough slate there as we get towards the back half of the regular season for BYU. But again, this is 2 teams that are at least in the top 2 tiers in the Big 12 as it stands right now in the preseason. So those are my top 5 games of the Big 12 this year. I'll have that out on Twitter a little bit later on after the show is done. I did want to wrap up with a couple things. And again, brisk pace on the show. We're 47 minutes in, and I still have some things to talk about. So again, I really appreciate all of you that are listening live. Let's go to Boulder, Colorado, shall we? Deion Sanders created a lot of buzz about 3 years ago, and that has since, at least for the time being, died down a little bit. And I mean, there have been other things to kind of shift our focus a little bit. Brendan Sorsby, right? So, by the way, I do just want to say congratulations to Coach Prime. He announced about 2 weeks ago that he was cancer-free. So, I'd like to congratulate Coach Prime. That's a really big deal and a really awesome story. So, let's look at Colorado year by year. In 2023, Coach Prime's first year, they went 4-8. Okay, so and then in 2024, they followed that up with a 9-win season, went 9-4. And we all started to think ourselves, okay, maybe Colorado's legit, maybe Colorado's serious. And then this last year, a win total low for Coach Prime during his time as the head coach at Colorado went 3-9. Now, I tend to think if you're looking at Colorado from a 50,000-foot view, what Colorado is on a consistent basis is somewhere in the middle of what they've accomplished so far. And here's what I mean by that. They went 4-8, 9-4 to 3-9. So I think it's kind of a return to the means for Colorado. I think they're somewhere in the middle. I think on an average basis, I see Colorado, at least for the time that Deion Sanders is there, being around the 6-6 mark. I think that's pretty fair to say. This whole Colorado experiment has been kind of rough. They return quarterback Julian Lewis, also known as Juju. He was a 5-star quarterback. If you remember, he was committed to Lincoln Riley and USC for a while, and then at the 11th hour, flipped to Colorado. That's a very talented kid. He was just kind of thrown in the fire early. What is kind of, and you heard me talk about this a little bit earlier in the show, and if you haven't, I highly recommend that you go back at some point and listen to what I had to say about teams that rely on the transfer portal a little too much. That's kind of been Colorado in a nutshell. They've relied heavily on the transfer portal, right? They have their first year had I think it was around 70 new players, right, during Coach Prime's first year. They had Shedeur Sanders, they had Travis Hunter, they had a lot of good weapons for Shedeur to throw to. The offensive line wasn't great, but they still had weapons, and that was able to get them by at least for that season. And then when they left, import another transfer portal class, and we see that that got them to 3-9. So they've just been relying on the transfer portal a little too much, and you can see that it's been very up and down for Colorado. So here's the good news, though, for the Buffs this year. They have a really good transfer portal class. They went and they got a wide receiver by the name of Danny Scudero from San Jose State. He was top 3 in the country in receiving yards last season. DeAndre Moore from Texas also comes in as a wide receiver. The really good defensive class in the transfer portal as well, but they do have a new defensive coordinator, which kind of makes me go, I'm just not too sure on what Colorado will be. And if you're too reliant on the transfer portal, we can see where it gets you. So that's kind of what I've made of Colorado, at least so far in the 3 years that Coach Prime has been there as the head coach. We'll have to see what year 4 has in store for them. They were picked to finish dead last in the Big 12, at least in the preseason. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Big news today, and this is exactly how I'm going to wrap up the show. The Big 12, they signed a multi-year sponsorship agreement with Monster Energy. This was announced by Brett Yormark at Big 12 Media Days. So here are some of the details of that deal. The schools will have jersey patches and field logos featuring the Monster Energy brand. The agreement is worth $20 million annually, according to the Sports Business Journal, which, if you do the math, averages about to $1.25 million per school. In simple terms, this is highway robbery. Monster Energy won this deal by a mile. If I'm the Big 12 and I'm Brett Yormark, I think you kind of got screwed over on this deal, because in a day and age where you need to, we're seeing athletic directors, we're seeing conference commissioners, we're seeing head coaches, we're seeing boosters do whatever they can to find a way to generate more money so that they can be competitive in this new landscape of college football. And signing a deal like this, first of all, I'm not a big fan of it as is. I'm very much a traditionalist when it comes to college football. So when I see things like this, right, Big 12, they're rebranding the Big 12 to, and I'm going to make sure I get this right, Monster Energy Big 12 football. So it'll no longer be referred to as the Big 12 Conference, at least by the corporate types. It'll be referred to as Monster Energy Big 12 football. And let's be honest, I'm one of you guys too. I'm a fan of this sport. Nobody's going to refer to it as that, right? Nobody's going to refer to the Big 12 as Monster Energy Big 12 football. We're just going to call it the Big 12, right? And it's also going to be that way for basketball too. So a really crazy deal for the Big 12 today, signing that media rights deal with Monster Energy. There are a couple things that are interesting about this. First of all, when I got the notification on my phone today that the Big 12 was signing a deal with Monster Energy, I'm not surprised. I was not surprised, because the Big 12 has very publicly said that they signed a deal with private equity, right? They're willing to get in bed with private equity, which is a whole other conversation in itself. But if they're willing to do things like that, then what makes you think that they wouldn't be willing to do something like this? And this is the first of its kind type of media rights deal. So knowing Yormark's history too, he came from the NBA. He was an executive. He's been very aggressive in pursuing new commercial revenue levers, whatever type of lever he can pull. And we saw that came into effect today, and that'll be official. So instead of seeing the Big 12 logo across the jersey for some of these teams, it'll just be Monster Energy. And that's what you see. You won't see the Big 12 logo. There is an interesting caveat to all of this, because there are four schools in the Big 12, Colorado, Kansas State, and TCU, who all have deals with Pepsi. Monster is partially owned by Coca-Cola. You see where the problem is? Also, what about the schools that are sponsored by Nike, Adidas? Are they okay with having Monster Energy right next to their logo? That's something that you got to take into account as well. I'd be interesting to see how that goes. But I had a conversation with Chris Lowe of On3 a while back, and we've seen schools, I think the reported number for LSU this year was that they've spent close to $45 million on their football roster this year. I think that's the exact number. But what Chris told me was we're going to see that cost. We're going to see about 10 to 15 teams in the very near immediate future pay up to $50 million for their rosters, which is completely ridiculous and unsustainable. So seeing things like this, seeing the Big 12 trying to scrape every last penny that they can, it makes sense. The Big 12 was last among the Power 4 conferences in total revenue generated by the conference at $710 million. And that's just the 2026 fiscal year. So that's actually up from around $620 million the year prior. But if you look at where the Big 10 and the SEC stand, right? The Big 10, $1.47 billion, and that's billion with a B, $1.47 billion in revenue generated by the Big 10 last year. The SEC was in second. They also generated over $1 billion, billion with a B. They were in second place. The ACC, $826.5 million. So that leaves the Big 12 at dead last among the Power 4. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we're seeing deals like this being signed. Again, it's the first of its kind. Again, not a fan of it. Not a fan of it. Brett Yormark, I respected the way he handled the whole Texas Tech Brendan Sorsby situation. And then he comes out and announces this at Big 12 Media Days today, and I'm just like, it doesn't make any sense. And Red Bull. I've personally never had a Red Bull. I've never had Monster either. But I guess they're comparable. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. I've never had either. So I'm more of a coffee guy myself, if I don't say. So that is it for tonight's show. Again, I really appreciate all of you that were listening live. Again, we're starting this show from scratch. And if you missed the very beginning of the show, I am doing the show right now from my in-home studio. Hopefully it won't be that way for long. We are in the process of building a podcasting studio over at 102.5 The Game. So hopefully that will be ready soon. But we just kind of have to work with what we got. And that's okay, because we're just sitting back and we're talking some college football in July. Okay. So really appreciate all of you that were listening live. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel at Parker_Kelley10 and also The Game Nashville, where you will see every show that we do. And we will be back on Thursday. So here's the plan. I did forget to mention this at the beginning. The plan as of right now is to, at least in the off season, to do a show Tuesday and Thursday of every week, starting at 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern. And then once the season gets going, I'd say around the midway point of August, we're going to do 3 shows a week. We're going to up it, because once football season gets here, we're wall to wall, and it is the busiest time of year, and we don't take a breath until February. So we'll be doing a show when football season starts, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. Again, if you haven't already, subscribe. And if you think you're subscribed, just go ahead and double check. Again, it does not sign you up for anything. It just helps us out. Really appreciate everybody listening live. We will see you again on Thursday. Take care, and God bless.